Welcome back. If this is your first time here, settle in. You picked a good night for it. I want to ask you something before we start. Have you ever found evidence that you were somewhere you don't remember being? A receipt, a message you sent but don't recall writing, a handprint on a window from the inside, when you know you locked up and left. Most people answer no, but the stories tonight are from people who answered differently. They cover a lot of ground: a farmhouse on the Norwegian coast, a hospital ward in Ohio, a family compound in Lagos, a stretch of highway in northern Canada. The wrongness in each one is specific and small, not a monster at the door. Something quieter than that, something that had already made itself familiar before anyone thought to check. If you're new, hit subscribe. You'll understand why people come back. If you've been here a while, thank you. Get the lights low. Earbuds in if you've got them. Let's begin. She had been coming every Sunday. I want to be clear about something before I explain this, because I've told it before, and I know where people get confused. My mother is not unwell in that way. She was 74 when this happened. She is 76 now. She remembers my birthday. She remembers what I wore the last time I visited. Whatever was going on in this story, it was not that. I live in Osaka. I work in marketing for a consumer goods company. My schedule is not flexible, and my mother lives alone in a small town in Nagano, in the house where I grew up. I visit twice a year. I know that's not much. I've always known. Christmas and Obon, usually, unless something with work makes that difficult. The last visit before all of this was in late August, 7 months before the call. The call wasn't from my mother, it was from her neighbor, Yoshida-san, a woman in her late 60s who has lived next door since before I was born. She called to tell me my mother was looking well lately. I remember exactly what she said because it confused me immediately. She said, "It must be nice that you've started coming more often. She seems so happy after your Sunday visits." I had not been back since August. It was now March. I said I thought there might be a misunderstanding. Yoshida-san laughed in a polite, uncertain way and said that she had seen me several times herself, going in through the front gate on Sunday afternoons. Said she'd waved once and I had waved back. I called my mother that evening. My mother was delighted to hear from me. She said she'd just been thinking about me because I'd been there 4 days before. She said I'd brought Maiken, the small mandarin oranges I've been bringing her since I was a teenager, the ones from a specific shop near Shinjuku that she prefers. She said we'd had tea and talked about her garden. She said I seemed a little tired. I sat with this for a long time. My mother is 74. She loves me and she misses me. The most obvious explanation was that she was filling in memory gaps with what she wished was true. I decided to visit the following weekend and sort things out gently. When I arrived on Friday evening, she was at the door before I could knock. She hugged me for a long time, which is not usual for her. We are not a physically demonstrative family. Then she held me back at arm's length and looked at me the way she does when something is slightly wrong. "You cut your hair," she said. I had not cut my hair since November. I said so. She touched the end of my hair and didn't say anything else. She went inside and I followed. On the hall chair, folded neatly, was a blue wool scarf. I don't own a blue wool scarf. I asked whose it was. My mother said it was mine. I'd left it last Sunday. She'd been meaning to remind me to take it. I told her I'd never seen it before. She looked at me with that particular expression, the one where she's deciding whether to push back or let something go. She let it go. That evening I asked her, as carefully as I could, about the Sunday visits. She had kept a notebook. This is something she started doing about 3 years ago, writing down visits and conversations. Her version of staying organized. She showed me the notebook. There were entries every Sunday for 8 months. 8 months of visits I had not made. The handwriting in the entries was hers. The visits were detailed, what I'd brought, what we'd discussed, what the weather was like, what I'd been wearing. Reading through them felt genuinely nauseating, because the details were exactly the kind of specific things my mother notices. The color of my jacket, whether I looked tired, the brand of tea I'd brought. I went next door to speak with Yoshida-san that same evening. I told her that I hadn't been visiting every week, that there seemed to be some confusion. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Then who was that woman?" She described her, my height, my build, my hair length as it was in summer, which is a few centimeters shorter than it is now. She had seen her maybe 6 or 7 times, walking in through the gate on Sunday afternoons and leaving 2 or 3 hours later, always carrying a bag. She had waved from the garden once, and the woman had waved back without stopping. She had assumed it was me and had no reason to think otherwise. I asked if she'd seen her face clearly. Yoshida-san thought about it. She said she'd mostly seen her from the side, or the back. She said she'd seen her face once, briefly, when she waved. I asked what she looked like. She said she looked like you. Then she paused and added, in a quieter voice, a little tired, like you'd been doing something difficult for a long time. I found 2 other pieces of evidence in the house that weekend. The first was a receipt from a convenience store in the next town, dated 3 Sundays before, for 2 bags of Micon and a green tea. The second was a photograph. The photograph was in a small decorative frame on my mother's bedside table. It showed my mother and me standing in the front garden. We were both looking at the camera. My mother was smiling the way she does in photos she likes. The woman beside her, the woman I am meant to be in this photograph, was wearing a white blouse I don't own and a blue scarf. I could not see her face clearly. The light was coming from behind us, and the image was slightly overexposed. It looked like me, the shape of it, the way she was standing. But I could not confirm it was me because I could not see the face. I asked my mother who took the photograph. She said I had taken it. I had asked her to use the self-timer on my phone, and she had laughed because she could never work it. I asked her, "Do I look different to you now than I did last Sunday?" She studied me for a long time. I could see her turning something over. Then she said in a careful voice, "Your voice is different, not wrong, just different. Like when you've been busy and you're not quite relaxed yet." She reached out and held my hand between both of hers. "But your hands are the same. You always had your father's hands. I'd know them anywhere." I went back to the notebook. The last entry was from 4 days before my arrival. 3 lines, it said. Yuki came. We had green tea. She seemed tired. She held my hand when she left and said, "Please remember me." I have never said those words to my mother. I would not say them. They don't sound like me, and they would frighten her. I don't know what to do with any of this. The blue scarf is in a bag in the trunk of my car. I haven't returned to my mother's town since that visit. I tell myself that whatever it was seems to have stopped. The notebook entries end there, and Yoshida-san reports nothing unusual since. I tell myself my mother is fine. But my mother called me 2 weeks after I got back to Osaka. She called at 9 p.m., which she never does. She said, "Yuki, that was you last weekend, wasn't it?" I told her I hadn't visited. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I knew. I kept thinking your hands were different." I have not told her what I found in the notebook. I have not told her about the receipt or the photograph. She is 76 and she lives alone, and I visit twice a year. I am trying to go back more often now. I drive up on Sundays when I can. Each time I arrive and knock, I wait to see if she seems surprised to see me, or if she says something about last week. So far she always seems genuinely surprised. So far she always holds my hands first, and says they feel like mine. I don't know what that means. I am not sure I want to. Kilometer 347. I'll tell this flat because that's the only way I can tell it without people interrupting me with explanations. I've driven Highway 37 north out of Dees Lake maybe 100 times. It's a nothing road. Long. Straight in the wrong sections. Winding where you don't want it to. I know it the way I know my own kitchen. There's a burned-out barn at Kilometer 347. Been there since a fire in '94, according to a guy I drive with. Nobody's cleared it. It just sits back from the road behind a scrub of dry grass. You notice it because everything else is trees. I passed it going north at 11:40 p.m., glanced at it the way I always do, logged it mentally, moved on. 1 hour and 6 minutes later I passed it again. I know that because I wrote the times down. I have a habit of noting markers on this stretch, because I've fallen into half-sleep before, and it keeps me honest. 347 was in my log both times. I had not turned around. I had not pulled a U-turn. My GPS was showing me traveling north. The road doesn't loop. I've driven it 100 times. I told myself I was tired, and left it there. 37 minutes after that, the barn again. 347. This time there was a figure standing at the edge of the road in front of it. I don't know if it was a child or a small adult. The headlights had it for maybe 2 seconds. Facing me, standing very still. I did not slow down. I kept my speed. I arrived in Dees Lake 11 minutes after expected. Odometer check was correct for the distance. I should have passed 347 exactly once. I didn't tell anyone for 3 months. Then, another driver on the same route, Russ, solid guy, done that stretch longer than me, mentioned the barn at 347 in passing. I asked if he'd had anything strange happen around that point. He said no. Then he stopped. He said there was a kid there once, maybe a year back, just standing in the headlights, didn't move. Russ said he checked his mirror afterward and the kid had turned around, was facing the other direction. I asked him how many times he'd passed 347 that night. He looked at me for a long moment and then he said, 3, but I figured I was tired. The seventh word, I need to explain what the ritual was before I explain what went wrong with it, because if I don't, the story doesn't make sense, and I have spent enough time with people not believing me. My grandmother was a woman named Ngozi. She died 4 years ago at the age of 87. She had lived in the same compound in Lagos her entire adult life, the house her husband built in 1963, and for as long as anyone in our family could remember, she had performed a monthly protective prayer on the first Sunday of each month. The prayer was specific, 7 spoken words in a specific sequence, a movement at each threshold in the house, a small offering of palm oil and bitter cola on the dish by the main entrance. She had learned it from her own grandmother. It was not church prayer, it was older than that. When she knew she was dying, she asked to teach it to me. I was the eldest grandchild with time to learn. She went through the ritual twice in her presence. She wrote the 7 words in her Bible, the old one with the cracked spine she'd kept since 1975. With their sequence numbered, she died 11 months later. I want to be precise about the timeline. For the first 22 months after her death, I performed the ritual exactly as she taught me. Nothing unusual. The compound felt the same. My mother's family remained well. In the 23rd month, I could not recall the 4th word. This happens when you're working from memory rather than reading. I was in the middle of the ritual and the word simply wasn't there. I used a word I believed was correct and continued. 2 things happened that month that I noted but did not connect. My sister's 2 children, sleeping in the rear room during the ritual as they always did on first Sundays, came to me after and said they had heard a voice in the back garden. My sister told them it was the neighbor's radio. I checked my grandmother's Bible. The word I had used in the ritual was wrong. The correct word was similar but not identical. I corrected my notes. The following month I performed the ritual correctly, but when I reached the threshold of the back door, the candle I was carrying went out. There was no draft. I relit it and continued. 3 months after that, month 26, I was mid-ritual, at the 2nd threshold, when I heard the words being spoken back at me from outside the window. Not an echo, not my own voice. Someone was speaking the words ahead of me, slightly faster than my pace, as if prompting, as if they had been listening long enough to learn the sequence. I finished the ritual. I went outside. The compound was empty. The offering dish had been moved, not knocked over, not disturbed, but repositioned, turned so that it was facing away from the entrance, rather than toward it. I did not perform the ritual for the next 3 months. I told myself I needed time to think. In those 3 months, small things began to fail. I will not detail them all. A windowsill that had been intact for years began to bleed water in dry weather. My nephew, who lived in the compound, began walking in his sleep toward the back gate. My mother's elderly house help said she kept hearing footsteps in the corridor at 4 in the morning. Not heavy footsteps, careful ones, as if something was learning the path. I consulted my great-aunt. She is 83, lives in Enugu, and knew my grandmother from childhood. I called her and explained the situation. I told her I thought the ritual had been interrupted and possibly compromised. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know, the ritual can only be done in complete solitude." That was always the first instruction. I told her I had always been alone. She said, "Your grandmother never taught the ritual to anyone else." She said that was the first rule, no witnesses, no teaching except directly. I told her that my grandmother had taught me directly as a witness. She said, "No." She told me she had decided not to teach it to anyone after your mother died. She said the house would have to manage without it. I did not speak for some time. She said, "Emeka, how did you learn the 7 words?" I told her I found them in the Bible. She said, she told me she had burned that page before she died. She said she burned it herself. I checked the Bible after I ended the call. The page was there. The handwriting was my grandmother's. The words were correct. I have not performed the ritual since. I have not been able to determine whether my grandmother wrote the note and then decided not to burn it, or whether she never wrote it at all. I have shown the page to my sister, who agrees it looks like our grandmother's hand. But my sister also says our grandmother told her the same thing. She told our great-aunt that she had decided to let the ritual stop with her generation. I do not know what I was performing for 2 years. I do not know what learned the words by listening at the window. I do not know what moved the offering dish. The back gate bolt is new and heavier. My nephew has not sleepwalked in 4 months. The window seal was repaired. I tell myself things are normal. But last month, on the first Sunday, I woke at 4 a.m. to a sound I couldn't identify. I lay still and listened. It sounded like a voice at the rear of the house, speaking in a low and careful rhythm. I did not get up to check. I have not gotten up to check since. 2:17 a.m. first. I should explain the clock. My wife passed away 3 years ago in October. She died at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was in the room, and I looked at the clock. She had inherited an antique Japanese mantel clock from her mother, which had sat on our bedroom shelf for 30 years. When she died, the clock stopped. I checked it later. It had stopped at 2:17. I did not wind it again. I left it on the shelf. This past January, I moved in with my daughter for 6 weeks after surgery. The antique clock stayed at home. I want to be clear about that because it matters later. The third morning at my daughter's apartment, I was in the kitchen before she was up, making tea. I glanced at the microwave clock. 2:17. I looked away, looked back. 2:18. Fine. I had simply looked at a specific moment. But I started to notice that every time something caused me to look at a clock, naturally, not when I was checking the time deliberately, but when a sound or movement made me glance. The time was 2:17. The microwave. My daughter's wristwatch on the kitchen counter. The clock on the stove, always 2:17. I began recording instances. I have an accountant's habit of documentation. By day 12, I had logged 9 separate observations. The digital clocks were functioning correctly. I tested them. When I watched them deliberately for 2 or 3 minutes, they ran normally. The phenomenon appeared only when I glanced at them without intending to check the time. My daughter said this was a well-documented attention bias, that I was likely looking at clocks at many moments during the day, but only registering the ones that matched a significant number. I told her I had been recording it. She looked at my list and said the sample size was too small. She may be right. The third incident I want to describe is harder to explain with sample size. My daughter was going through old family photographs, sorting them for a project. She brought one to me because she didn't recognize the setting. It was a photograph of my wife's childhood home in Busan, a black and white image, probably from the 1960s. My wife's family or part of it around a low table. On the wall behind them, a clock. I took it to the window for better light. The clock on the wall of that photograph read 2:17. I could make out the hands clearly. My daughter said it was likely the time when the photo was taken. I agreed. That would be the obvious answer. Then she looked at the window in the photograph. Curtains open. Strong light coming from outside. The photograph was taken in the afternoon. I have the photograph with me now. I look at it sometimes. I have no explanation that I'm satisfied with. My daughter does not like to discuss it. She says she's glad I didn't bring the antique clock from home. I didn't tell her that 2 nights ago I came into the kitchen at 3 a.m. for water. I did not look at the microwave. I specifically did not look at it. I don't know. I kept my back to it. I drank my water and went back to bed. I can't tell you what it said. I don't know. I kept my back to it. The volunteer, I want to start by saying that the hospital I was doing my rotation at is a normal hospital. I am telling this as clearly as I can because I've told it before, and people keep asking me if I'm sure I didn't just mix up 2 different women, or if the volunteer coordinator could have made an error. I've thought about those options for a long time. They don't hold. So, I'm a nursing student, 2nd year. This was my first long clinical placement. 6 weeks across multiple departments at a regional hospital in Eastern Ohio. Cardiac, oncology, pediatrics, general medicine. I was moving between units a lot, which is actually part of why I noticed her. First time I saw her, end of week 1, near the nurses' station on the 2nd floor. An older woman, maybe mid-60s, Gray hair pulled back, pink volunteer vest, the kind all the volunteers wear. She was carrying a small basket with water cups. She smiled at me when I walked past. I assumed she was a regular week. 2, I started seeing her in more places. Oncology wing, Tuesday morning. Then pediatrics that same afternoon. Then cardiac on Wednesday. I did notice it, but hospital volunteers do work multiple floors, and I was new, so I put it down to unfamiliarity with how things ran. The thing that made me actually say something was this. I saw her going into a patient's room at the same time I needed to go into that room with a tray. I stepped in after her. She was already at the window adjusting the blinds. The patient was resting. I did what I needed to do and left. I passed the nurse's station 1 minute later, and she was there, at the station, 2 floors worth of hallway, and an elevator away from where I'd just seen her. I know how that sounds. I went back. The room she'd been in had no one in it, but the patient. I mentioned her to my supervisor, Miss Rains, older nurse, been there 20 years, patient but not someone you waste her time. I described the volunteer. Miss Rains said that was unusual because their volunteer program had been suspended 18 months ago. Insurance policy change. No active volunteers of any kind. She asked me to point her out if I saw her again, and to try to get a look at her ID badge. I didn't see her for 5 days. Then week 4, I was on the 3rd floor, cardiac, and she was in a patient's room. Patient in room 304, elderly man. No listed visitors, admitted for irregular heartbeat, expected to be there for another week. The woman was sitting in the visitor's chair, facing the door, hands in her lap. Not reading, not using a phone, just sitting. She looked like she was keeping watch. I went in, I said, "Can I help you?" She looked up at me and smiled. She said, "I'm just keeping him company." The man was asleep. I said I needed to see her volunteer ID. She said she didn't have it with her today. She must have left it in her car. I said I'd need to come back with my supervisor. She nodded like that was completely reasonable. I went to get Ms. Rains. It took maybe 3 minutes. We came back. The room had no one in it except the patient, still sleeping. The visitor chair had been moved. It was in the center of the room now, not against the wall, not beside the bed. In the center of the room, exactly equidistant from every wall. Miss Rains stood in the doorway for a moment. She said, "That chair wasn't there this morning." The man in 304 was discharged 6 days later, ahead of schedule. Better than projected, the chart said, improved more quickly than his case usually goes. 2 weeks after that, I saw the woman again. Different patient, same floor. I went straight to Ms. Rains. Ms. Rains went to the volunteer coordinator, a woman named Deb, and had a formal conversation. I was asked to come in and give a description. Deb called me later that afternoon. She said she'd gone through the active volunteer roster, the suspended roster, and the historical records. No active volunteer matching my description. Then she'd gone back further, 15 years of records. She found one match. Female volunteer, worked the hospital from 2001 to 2007. Worked primarily with patients who had no visitors. Deb said the woman had told her on her intake form that it was the most important work a volunteer could do. She passed away in 2009. I asked where. Deb took a breath. She said, in this building, she was a patient here for 2 weeks before she died. Beat. 3rd floor. I asked what had happened to the patients she'd sat with. Deb didn't answer right away. I could hear her with papers. Then she said records are patchy, but the ones I can pull, most of them did better than expected. Discharged earlier. Improved. She paused. One didn't. I asked about that one. Didn't. I asked about that one. She said she didn't have enough information to say more. She thanked me and ended the call. I finished my rotation 2 weeks after that. I did not see the woman again. The man from room 304 sent a card to the nurse's station. I read it when it was passed around. He said he felt he owed his recovery to the staff, and to the volunteer who had sat with him when he'd been frightened in the night. He said she had a calm he'd never encountered before, and that she had told him, more than once, that he was going to be fine. No one on the floor knew who he was talking about. I know that some people will read this and want it to be comforting. A friendly ghost, doing good work. I've tried to feel comforted by it, but the chair in the center of the room keeps coming back to me. Not placed there for comfort. Placed there deliberately, exactly, for a reason I don't understand. And the one case Deb mentioned, with the outcome that wasn't better than expected. I've thought about that. I don't know what it wanted in those rooms. I don't know what it was measuring. The rules for the shore house, I want to get to the part I can actually explain, which is the part that happened. The part I can't explain, I'm going to describe as accurately as I'm able, and then leave alone. That seems like the only fair way to handle it. I'm an environmental consultant. British. I rented a farmhouse on a narrow cape in western Norway for 3 weeks last September. One of those old traditional properties, thick walls, small windows, the kind that faces south toward the water and has its back to the wind from the north. I'd been to Norway twice before for work. I speak very little Norwegian. I went alone for a working break. Field notes for a project, some reading, proper quiet. The neighbor, a woman named Karine, brought the key over the first morning. She was in her 70s, sharp. She handed me an envelope with the house instructions and a list of rules. It was a handwritten list, in Norwegian, with English translations she'd written beside each one in smaller text. She said the rules were old from the family who had owned the property before the current owner bought it. She said she personally found them sensible. 7 rules. I will give them to you in the order she'd written them. 1. Close the shutters before dark. 2. Do not whistle between sunset and full dark. 3. Do not leave shoes pointing toward the water. 4. Keep the door bolt in when you sleep, not just the lock. 5. If you hear your name from the water, do not answer and do not look. 6. Do not count the stones on the path after nightfall. 7. If something knocks 3 times, do not open the door until dawn. I read the list while she stood there. I suppose my expression gave something away because she said, "This is old coastal country. Some of these things have reasons that have simply been forgotten. Others were written by someone who had a bad experience and wanted to make sure no one repeated it." She said it without emphasis. Then she asked if I had any questions about the house, and she left. I followed most of the rules out of politeness. The shutters made practical sense. The nights were cold and the light leak into the bay would attract insects. The bolt was solid, and I sleep better when things are locked. I didn't particularly want to whistle in the dark regardless. I didn't leave shoes by the door. Night 8. I had been working late and gone to bed around 1 in the morning. I was not fully asleep, that half-aware state where sounds become part of whatever you're nearly dreaming. I heard something from the direction of the water, a voice, my name. I want to be honest about this. I am not certain I heard it clearly. I am not certain it was my name. It could have been the specific acoustic of water and wind on that cape producing a sound that my sleeping brain shaped into something familiar. That is the simplest explanation. I want to put it on record. What I can tell you is that I went to the window. The next memory I have that I can verify is sitting at the kitchen table at noon the following day. Fully dressed, outdoor clothes, boots still on. My laptop was open in front of me. There were 11 hours of field notes on the screen, dated from 2 a.m. to 1 p.m., with a 6-hour gap in the middle where the autosave timestamp showed no activity. The notes were accurate. I'd read them after the fact, cross-referencing with my previous work. Every observation was correct, well-formed, professionally written. In my format. I called Karin. I told her what I remembered and what I didn't. She was quiet for a moment. She asked, "Did you answer it?" I told her I didn't know. I'd gone to the window. She said, "If you're in the house and it's daylight, you're fine. Don't go down to the shore again this stay." I asked what would have happened if I had answered. She said then I would have found the notes. I asked what that meant. She said, "You'd have gone to it and not come back. The notes would have been left behind, because you'd have still been working when you went." I left 3 days before my rental ended. The morning before I left, Karen came to collect the key. I showed her the 11 pages of notes. She read through them for a few minutes, carefully. She handed them back without comment. Then she said, "This isn't your handwriting." I have my own handwriting. I know what it looks like. The notes were in my handwriting. I told her so. She didn't argue. She said, "Tell no one you stayed in this house during this period, and use a different rental next time." I asked why. She looked toward the water. She said because it knows your work now. It knows what your work looks like and how it reads. That's more than it had before. I drove south the following morning without going to the shore. 3 weeks later, I received an email at my work address. A colleague forwarded it to me with a note saying, "Did you send these from a different account?" Attached to the forwarded email were 11 pages of field notes. My name on each page, dated from the night in question. The email had been sent from my work address to 3 colleagues at 7:48 a.m. from an IP address that resolved to the coast of Rogaland. I had been 4 hours south of there by then. I deleted the notes and told my colleagues it had been a software error. I haven't explained further. I haven't been back to that part of Norway. I still don't know what happened between 2 a.m. and the next afternoon. I still don't know who sat at my kitchen table and worked for 11 hours. The notes are gone now, deleted from every server I had access to. I made sure of it. I had a dream last month where I was sitting at that table with the window open. Someone was at the window. I couldn't see them clearly, but I knew they had been there all night. And in the dream I felt, not frightened, but guilty, the way you feel when you realize you've given something away that you didn't mean to. I don't dream about it often, but when I do, I'm always at the table. I'm always still working. The man from the market, I'll start with the ending, because it's the only part I haven't been able to explain, and the rest of the story only makes sense once you know what I'm working toward. 3 months ago, I found a photograph on my phone. My sister's hospital room in Belo Horizonte, the day before she died. I don't know when it was taken or by whom. My sister died 2 years ago. I moved to Curitiba 8 months after. I left that life behind as much as I could. The photograph shows the room clearly. Her bed, the window, the chair beside it, where I sat. In the chair across the room, the one by the door, there's a man. Mid-50s, ordinary. He's half turned from the camera, not looking at it. That man is the one I've been seeing at my market. The first time I noticed him was maybe 5 weeks after I moved to Curitiba. He was at the farmer's stalls I go to on Saturday mornings. He nodded at me like someone who knew me. I nodded back and kept going, because in the city you make those errors all the time. You mistake strangers for people you've seen before. But he was at my pharmacy 2 weeks later, and at my bus stop the week after that, and each time, he greeted me like something was established between us. I started to get annoyed. In Curitiba, at that bus stop, at those hours, you see the same 40 people every week. I assumed he'd confused me for someone else. Third time, at the pharmacy, he asked how my sister was doing. I don't have a sister, I told him that. He apologized immediately. Said he must have confused me with someone. He genuinely seemed embarrassed. But the following week, have you been back to Belo Horizonte recently? You mentioned you're from there? I had not mentioned this to him. I had not mentioned anything to him. I told him I had never said that. He insisted I had, that he'd remembered my accent. I have a standard city accent. There is nothing Minas Gerais about my speech anymore. I've been told this. I let it go. I told myself it was a neighborhood fixture who was too familiar with everyone. Some people are like that. Then, early morning, my bus stop, 6:40 a.m., he was already there. He said, without preamble, "You have a sister." Not a question. I started to tell him I didn't. He said, "She died. August, 2 years ago. I know because I was there." He said it the way you'd say the number on a receipt. Not unkindly. Just stating it. He was right. She died in August. I was there. She died before I moved here, and I don't speak about it, and I have never told anyone in Curitiba about her. There is no logical way for him to know this. I asked him who he was. He looked at me in a particular way, the look of someone who has made a small social error, who has said something they weren't supposed to say yet. He said, "Oh, just that one word then. You don't know me yet." And he walked away. I've looked for him since. I haven't found him. When I found the photograph on my phone last month, I spent a long time looking at the man in the chair. His face is partially turned away, but there is enough. The build, the posture, the particular way his hands rest in his lap. I don't know what "you don't know me yet" means. I don't know what it means that he was in that room before I met him. I don't know why the photograph was on my phone, or when it got there, or who took it. I think about it most when I'm at the bus stop in the morning. I don't look for him exactly, but I'm aware of everyone around me. I'm aware of who knows my name. That last one is going to stick with me for a while. You don't know me yet. I don't love that phrasing. Thank you for spending the night with these. You sat with some genuinely unsettling accounts, and I appreciate that. I know it's not easy listening. Some of this, especially the ones that live inside the ordinary. Your mother's notebook, your own handwriting. Something that learned your face and used it. Get some rest if you can. Keep your lights on as long as you need them. I'll be here next week.